the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. And we're just going to jump right into it. We're going to begin with resolutions. And we have RS 2018-1289, sponsors Mendez, Haywood, and Vercher. Authorizes the Metro Development and Housing Agency to enter into a pilot agreement and accept payments in lieu of ad valorem taxes with respect to a multifamily housing project located at 3474 Dickerson Pike. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Do you want to be recognized on this, Councilman Mendez? All in favor? Councilman Glover.
Well, I was hoping he would be because, all right, so when I read the analysis on this, it says period of 10 years, pilot payments not to exceed 10 years. At the end of 10 years, does the city start getting that money back?
Someone from finance want to speak to that? Mr. Kane?
Joe Kane with MDHA. Yes, the way the pilot program is set up, you get the existing taxes, at a minimum, you get the existing taxes that are being paid on the property today. It also increases, this particular pilot will increase the amount of taxes that are going to be paid on an annual basis. I believe the increase is at about 3% per annum is going to be increasing going to Metro. The pilot payments all come into Metro, and at the end of the 10 years, the property reverts back to the full tax rolls of Metro.
Okay, all right, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Glover. Just so that we're not out of order, I didn't catch you before I called for the discussion. So seeing no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? You're no. Councilman Roden? Resolution passes. RS 2018-1290, sponsor Vercher, approves an agreement between Metro and Seva Freight, LLC, for operation of a foreign trade zone site and for approval of amendments and future foreign trade zone agreements by resolution. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilman Mendez.
I don't know who the right person for this is, but I was just hoping to, I tried to figure it out from the analysis, but I didn't really have a good sense of what a foreign trade zone is, and just hopefully some explanation about that.
We can ask Mr. Wiltshire if he can speak to that due to his office will be responsible for administering. Mr. Wiltshire.
Thank you. To do this in 20 words or fewer, a foreign trade zone is an area that is ostensibly outside of U.S. control for customs purposes.
15 words.
Okay.
We know the definition. I think you were looking for a little bit more. Yeah.
So I mean, with a little bit more explanation. So it's a program run by the U.S. Department of Commerce that designated areas are, again, technically outside of the U.S. for customs purposes. And so companies establish particular geographic footprints, their software and physical security purposes to designate what those areas are, but they can then import goods into those areas, manufacture or just redistribute products from those areas, and then export them outside the United States. And it's as though the products never came into the U.S. It's a program that encourages manufacturing in the U.S. by helping companies avoid customs fees. There are several hundred designated geographic areas across the country. We are foreign trade zone area number 78. And so companies that establish foreign trade zones within Davidson County, or essentially a 90-minute drive of Davidson County, we are the grantee and the administrators of that, and we collect fees in exchange for playing that role.
Okay, that last bit was my last question about how we have a role with something that's outside the county, but I think you just described it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Wiltshire, for me, how did we come up with that $22,000 per year, the zone administration fee?
Yeah, it's actually been in place since before my time here. We've taken a couple of opportunities where we've asked industry experts to sort of calibrate our fees against the fees charged in other foreign trade zones. And the number that we have is in line with sort of national norms and averages, and we believe fairly compensates the city for the cost of administering the program.
Is this the high end of the fee or the low end?
You know, it's really complicated because there are about a dozen different fees. There are application fees and other sort of expansion administration fees that other communities charge. So on an all-in basis, I would say we're sort of middle of the road to maybe slightly higher than some other communities.
Does this fee come back to the general fund or?
It does.
Okay,
Goes into the general fund.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution passes. RS 2018-1291, sponsor Virture, authorizes the Department of Law to compromise and settle the personal injury claim of LaShonda Clayton against the Metro in the amount of $30,000. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilman Mendez, you're not seeking recognition on this, are you? Okay. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution passes. RS 2018-1292, sponsor Virture, approves an amendment to a contract between the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services and Metro to extend the term of the contract for court order evaluations and treatment for defendants charged with misdemeanor crimes. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Come on. Opposed? Resolution passes. RS 2018-1293, sponsors Virture and Roberts, approves a contract between the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services and the Nashville Fire Department for emergency transportation services. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilman Glover.
Let me get, if I can, let me have finance. Let's talk about what this means as far as the money coming back in. Does it go to the general services account, or does it go straight to the fire department for operational services?
Mr. Harmon?
Councilman, it's my understanding these monies would be deposited in the general fund.
Okay. Can we find that out for sure? And here's the reason I ask, is because apparently we are having some difficulties with the fire department now as far as staffing, et cetera. As we all know, it was a tough budget time. But I think any time that we're asking them to perform a service, it wouldn't probably hurt if they actually got the money to be able to operate their department with. So can we have an answer on that tomorrow, please?
Certainly.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution passes. RS 2018-1294, sponsors Virture and Roberts, approves a grant from the Tennessee Highland Rim Healthcare Coalition to the Nashville Fire Department for an ambubus conversion kit for testing and transporting multiple patients. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution passes. RS 2018-1295, Withers, Virture, and Roberts approves a port security grant from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security to the Office of Emergency Management to protect maritime critical infrastructure and support the overall port resilience and recovery capabilities. There is a letter to approve from the sponsor. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution passes. RS 2018-1296, sponsors Kendall, Virture, and Roten, approves a grant from the Tennessee Tennis Association to the Metro Nashville Parks and Recreation Department to fund the renovation of the Hatley Park Tennis Center. There is a letter from the sponsor for approval. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution passes. RS 2018-1297, sponsor Kendall, Virtue, and others, appropriates funds from the Department of Parks and Recreation to Creative Parks Nashville to provide big band dances in Centennial Park at no cost to the public. There is a letter of approval from the sponsor. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution passes. RS 2018-1298, sponsors Withers, Virtue, and Roberts, approves a grant from the Friends of Shelby Park and Bottoms to the Department of Parks and Recreation to provide two-door repairs at Hangar 1 at the Cornelia Fort Air Park and to create secure storage space. There is a letter of approval from the sponsors. Their motion. It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Resolution passes. RS 2018-1299, sponsors Virtue and Roden, approves a grant from the Tennessee Arts Commission to the Metro Arts Commission for general operating support to cover program and direct expenses related to art programs, research, and community engagement. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Were you seeking recognition, Councilman Pulley?
Just had a brief question. It looks like there's a local match on this. So can anybody speak to that?
For the viewer and audience, make sure you state your name. Thank you.
Yes, Laurel Fisher, Grants Manager, Metro Arts Commission. Yes, we use the funds from the general fund that we give out through grants as our matching funds to accommodate dollar for this grant.
So this comes out of your budget that's already been approved, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing further.
Councilman Mendez, we're on discussion.
Let me follow up on Councilman Pulley's question. When this term started, I asked the question like that on a couple different grants, and Ms. Lomax O'Neill told me at the time that anytime there was a match required, that it was already been approved as part of a budget. Otherwise, we wouldn't be getting it. And I guess I have wondered that same question and wanted to see confirmation from finance that that's still the case.
Mr. Harmon?
Councilman, I'm sorry, could you restate?
Yeah, so when we get the analysis, some of these grants every meeting have got a match. And what we got told at the beginning of the term is that if there's ever a match, it's always part of an approved budget. So we don't have to ask that every time. And I'm just seeking confirmation that's still the case.
That would still be the case, yes, sir.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Councilman Mendez. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Resolution passes. RS 2018-1300 approves a grant from the Greater Nashville Regional Council to the Metro Social Services Commission to provide nutrition, home, and community-based services to eligible seniors throughout Davidson County. There is a letter of approval. Well, I'm the, I don't know who did that, Mike, but is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilman at Large Shulman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have to recuse myself on this one. Thank you.
Is noted. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution passes. RS 2018-1301, sponsors Virtue and Gilmore, approves an amendment to a grant from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to the Metro Board of Health to enhance access to a comprehensive continuum of high-quality community-based care for low-income individuals and families with HIV disease. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilman Shulman, were you seeking recognition on this also? Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution passes. RS 2018-1302, sponsors Vercher and Gilmore, approves an amendment to a grant from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to the Metro Board of Health to enhance access to a comprehensive continuum of high-quality community-based care for low-income individuals and families with HIV disease. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution passes. RS 2018-1303, sponsors Vercher and Gilmore, approves a grant from the Tennessee Department of Health to the Metro Board of Health to achieve sustained tuberculosis control and enhance prevention to eventually eliminate tuberculosis as a public health threat in Tennessee. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution passes. RS 2018-1304, sponsors Vercher and Gilmore, approves a grant from the Tennessee Department of Human Services and the Metro Board of Health to conduct immunization record audits for child care centers, drop-in centers, and group child care homes to ensure the safety and well-being of children and families in Tennessee. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution passes. RS 2018-1305, sponsors Vercher and Gilmore, approves a substitute grant contract from the Tennessee Department of Health to the Metro Board of Health to improve the health of those residing or visiting Davidson County to prevent and control the use of tobacco products. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution passes. RS 2018-1306, sponsors Vercher and Gilmore, approves an amendment to a grant from the United States Environmental Protection Agency to the Metro Board of Health for the ongoing collection of data and ambient air concentrations in Nashville. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution passes. RS 2018-1301, sponsor Scott Davis, requests the Davidson County Sheriff, the Nashville Fire Department Chief, and the Director of Public Property Administration to declare properties at 500 and 506 2nd Avenue North to be surplus. I need a committee member to make a It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilman Mendez.
And I'm not sure who the right person for this is, but I'm wondering what the intention is with this property.
We have the sponsor here. Hit your button, Councilman Davis.
On.
You're on.
Thank you, committee. Well, as we know that the sheriff has a new facility being built right here, and also there's a new one built across the river in East Nashville. Once that construction is completed, are we near a date where we can start looking at that? The goal here is to, surplus it first to make sure there's no other agencies that need it. I think this is how the process goes. And then I want to explore the possibility of, once the sheriff does not need that building, using the funds to help with the raises for the fire department and the Metro employees. And I know a lot of us don't like looking at this. However, though, it's one of the options we can explore, because that riverfront property there can get us up to between $25 and $37 million, which will do a lot of help for our citizens. Either way, the sheriff we're building a new jail, which is getting close to being done, and also the sheriff has a new office building that's going to be over there in East Nashville near Shelby Avenue. Near Fatherland. Excuse me. And so I'm just looking to explore options, because just like all of us, we promise to keep looking at other ways to get our budgets back in line. And I just thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Mendez.
Does the administration have a position on this?
Anyone from public property? Did we flip the coin? What we doing?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're it, Mr. Harmon.
Thank you, Councilman. To our knowledge, these properties are still in use, and so we would not entertain surplusing them at this time?
All right, I guess, I mean, I'm not really in favor of selling properties to make an operating budget meet, so, and if they're still in use, and I guess I'm going to be opposed to this.
I guess, Kimberly, I'm going to go back to the sponsor. If you can articulate, because as a committee, we don't know what work has gone into this proposed resolution. How did it come about? If there was conversations with the sheriff, the fire department, and so forth. I'm going to come back to you, Councilman Davis, so you can enlighten the committee.
The major conversation happened with the sheriff, and there was some preliminary conversation with the fire department. Now, as far as my understanding was, at first, what we're going to look at is, and if we need to add it to the legislation, that's fine. First, what we're going to look at is, are there any other metro agencies that can use the property before we surplus it? That's number one. And also, we're waiting until the sheriff has 2 facilities going up right now. He's got the new jail, and then his new office buildings being put up off of Fatherland over there, you know, near the public works offices in East Nashville. So we're not kicking the sheriff out, and we're not pushing ahead this right away. We're going through a process, you know, first seeing, okay, how close is the completion of the sheriff's new facilities? And second, are there any other metro agencies that can use the property? So we're going through a process. And right now, I'd much rather look at this option, you know, because we're all trying to figure out, some of us suggested raising taxes, others wanted to sell a spot where our school buses are being stored at. I'm just starting a conversation. And I did express, you know, to the agencies that, hey, we're just looking at this. If I need to add an amendment to put those caveats in there, I'm more than willing, but I thought that's how the process goes. First, we see, okay, the sheriff's got his new offices, then we see what other metro agency could use those buildings. And administration, if you can step in, and if I'm wrong, I'm more than willing to amend.
About the process?
Yes, about the process and/or the buildings, because we don't want to kick the sheriff. We don't want to kick anybody out.
Here's Steve.
But we have buildings under construction.
Yes, Councilman. Typically, the surplusing process already includes what we call mandatory referral, where the request to surplus properties is sent over to planning. All the agencies have a chance to respond to it.
And that's all.
And I think, but being 2 years out, I'm not sure it's the right time to be going out and declaring property surplus.
Well, I just want to start the conversation.
Understand.
And since we've already put the money aside to build the new sheriff's facilities, both of them, the jail and the new locations.
Right.
And their organizations, if we get a year and 6 months out, just like we did with the convention center, which helped us to get a fusion of the Barnes Fund, they gave us $5 million, and they waited over a year, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe, who was here with me then when that happened? Matt and Rich, and if y'all could help out with what happened with the convention center, will we use the $5 million there? All I'm doing is looking at repeating the process like we did with the convention center. We just didn't kick the agencies and the companies out of the convention center downtown. It was about a year or year and a half, and they gave us money initially, and that $5 million helped. And if we could do something similar, maybe get $7 million, we can get these raises done for the folks without raising taxes. I'm just trying to start a conversation. And then with those acres of riverfront property there, the tax revenue that we'll get every year from that, because right now, Metro, we can't tax ourselves. So that'll be additional $900,000 a year in tax revenue. I know this may be a little early, but we got to start having these conversations now, because in 6 months, if we can do something similar, and, you know, Matt, Rich, do your magic, get that extra $7 million like you did with the convention center.
So if I'm clear on this, what you're asking is to declare these properties surplus approximately a year and a half to 2 years before they would be available. So we would essentially be selling property in the open market, not knowing this market's going to go in 2 years.
Well, we did it before. I mean, we got the convention center the downtown, right next across from the Renaissance Hotel, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes,
Where the African American History Museum is going. We did the same thing, and we got that money, and it was a non-refundable $5 million. And all I'm saying is we can start doing the same thing now, or looking at it. This is the area that we're trying to help find some of these solutions. And if we can get $5 million, we can get at least $7 million for that riverfront space down there just ahead of time.
Right.
I'm just trying to find a solution here, and I'm more than willing to defer or add some amendments. We're all just trying to help out here, and we have potential here to get close to $1 million a year in tax revenue, and get that infusion like we did with the convention, with the old convention center, and and then after it sells, we'll have more money. Just like a lot of you, I'm trying to work on our budget issues like we all promised and what you're all doing, after the budget to kind of say, hey, we didn't raise taxes, but we're trying to tighten our belts and find out other ways to make sure that we keep our commitments to the Metro employees. And that's all.
Certainly, I understand. So what you're saying is go to surplus these properties early, do an RFP, ask for a non-refundable deposit to the winner of the RFP.
Yes. We've tried this before. We'll let them know. We've done this before, with the Cole Convention Center, and do a similar process. I'm just starting the conversation. I'm fine with, adding an amendment or maybe deferring this one meeting just so that we can kind of get our arms around this. But if we can go look at our institutional memory, once again, I'm not trying to pick on Mr. Cooper or Mr. Wilshire or Rich there, but they were here when we did the deal with the convention center. The old convention center.
Councilman, the convention center was a little bit different. First, there was an RFP that that was competitively bid, and the winning bidder was selected. The payments that were made to Metro, the non-refundable payments, were for delayed closing dates while the developer was getting the financing in place. So that was it was not declared surplus. Well, at that point, at the time we went through the process, the convention center had already moved out and was in the new facility.
Gotcha. Well, I am willing to defer on one meeting and maybe definitely next meeting, just so that we can start the ball rolling. And there are parties that are interested, and they'll want to wait until the sheriff is ready to move into his new building. And so let's just start the conversation, because because right now, in about a couple of years, we're going to have probably the best riverfront there in America. So I'll defer one meeting, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Mendez, were you seeking additional recognition?
I was just going to move to defer one meeting.
Okay, it's been moved for deferral and seconded, but we still have council members want discussion. Councilman Glover.
Yeah, because, first of all, is this binding? Mr. Jameson?
No, sir.
No, it's not binding. But we are trying a new concept. So what we're looking at is we'd actually surplus the property before something is planned for it, which would be kind of a unique concept based on some of the things we've done here of late. So if it's not binding, okay, but I think that's right that we go ahead and we defer until we understand further what we're doing here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Glover. Councilman Pulley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would, on the deferral, I'd like more time than 2 weeks. We got 3 pieces of property now, and one of which is in my district, and we got 3 council members who've got some pretty good consternation over those properties being surplus currently. I appreciate very much the council member looking for ways and exploring ways to look at ways to fund things that we weren't able to fund in this budget. However, I also took a deeper dive into some of the surplus properties that we've done historically, and I'm not sure that ultimately long-term they have really been in the best interest of the city. So I have some pretty deep reservations about that moving forward. I would encourage the sponsor to maybe kick this down the road a little farther than 2 weeks if you plan on seeking my support on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman Pulley. Vice Chair Schulman. Vice Chair Schulman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I got the same concerns. It sounds like people need to sit down and kind of talk through this process, including the process, what's happened in the past. I appreciate Councilman Davis trying to come up with innovative ways to do things. I think that's great, particularly after the tough budget situation that we went through. But I'm not sure of the process. I'm not sure if this is the right way to do it. So I'd appreciate, I think the deferral motion is in keeping. So that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Was that a one-meeting deferral? Okay. So the motion was for a one-meeting deferral. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution is deferred. Now we're on to, we have a late resolution. Sponsor Glover expresses the intention of the Metropolitan Council to suspend action on any agreement related to the lease and redevelopment of the Nashville Fairgrounds until all necessary procedures have been completed. Councilman Glover.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think tomorrow night I'll have to ask to suspend the rules. Wasn't positive it was going to come before the committee. Let me tell you why I'm doing this particular resolution. It's non-binding, correct, Mr. Jameson?
Correct.
All right. The reason I'm doing this is because last Wednesday night we met and we asked some pretty challenging questions. However, it's questions that should have been answered rather easily on what's the parking situation at the fairgrounds, what's this, what do a number of components look like there? And we didn't get answers. The other thing that I've been asking for, and I think several of us have been asking for, is to see the study that the MLS did on why they selected that particular location. Well, as we've learned new information, there wasn't really a study done. Basically, they were told that's where it was going to do or where it was going to go. Then, when we looked at the parking situation, we're hearing numbers of there's going to be 6,000 spaces. Ask if there's a study done where there's one coming, but one was finished in February of this year. That says we'll need about 8,200 spots. That was at 27,000 seats. At 33,000 seats, we might need between 10 and 11,000 parking spaces. So what I'm asking us to do is to ask the commissions and the boards to slow down, to find out, before we put ourselves in harm's way and we jeopardize the taxpayers because we start signing deals when we can't actually accommodate what might be promised in the deal, and all of a sudden the next thing we find out, oh, we have to build a parking garage, or we have to do this, we have to do that. Plus the land hadn't been surplused yet. That's when I was saying a minute ago, gosh, we're following processes here. I'm just simply saying, guys, it might not hurt for us to finish our due diligence before we put the taxpayers in harm's way. So that's why I filed it. Again, we don't have the authority to tell them don't move forward, but I think we can ask, don't move forward, because frankly, I think we're in a very awkward position now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Glover.
And I'll move the late file resolution. I don't know if the committee has to vote on this.
It is brought before the committee. You'll have to move to suspend the rules tomorrow at the council meeting and at the rules committee tomorrow.
Okay, well then I'll suspend the rules tomorrow then. Thank you, Chair.
Councilman Mendez.
I guess since there's no motion, I'll skip my questions.
You don't want to seek Councilman Glover.
Well, I just want to make sure that we're doing this correctly. I mean, Mr. Jameson, do I need to make a motion here at the committee?
Yeah, you want the committee's consideration.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, I was told that the committee wasn't going to hear. Okay, so that's fine. So then, therefore, yes, I move adoption of the non-binding resolution.
It's been moved and seconded. Councilman Mendez.
Thanks. I guess like all of us, just read this a couple hours ago. And I guess a couple questions for Mr. Jameson, and then you can, I guess, maybe outsource to the administration. There's a few questions. One, there's a reference to surplusing the property, and definitely at the meeting we had last week, there was a statement by somebody from Metro, I can't remember who, saying that the property had not been surplused. And I guess my question is, does the 10 acres have to go through a surplus process in order to be the subject of the lease?
My understanding is that the Metropolitan government is considered the fee title owner of the property. I believe the administration's intent is to surplus the property. I will defer to them for clarification, for confirmation.
So I hear that as a
Attorney
yes,
Cooper?
Yes, it does need to be, and it hasn't happened yet.
It would not be surplus because it's a ground lease that the council would be approving by ordinance. So there would be no reason to surplus it. The council will be approving the long-term ground lease.
So I guess I infer from that there's no length of lease period that would make something essentially like a sale that requires surplusing?
Over 49.
Mr. Berry says that it's 100 years.
So at 100 years, we'd have to surplus it?
Well,
if it was a 100-year lease, we'd have to go through the surplus process now, but at 99 years, we don't?
and keep in mind, if you had it, let's just say you had an ordinance that said it has to be surplused before you can lease it. The council by ordinance can change any other ordinance. So as long as the council is approving it by ordinance, that's legally sufficient.
Yeah, I didn't mean to, I'm not making a point, I'm just trying to figure out that. I guess the other thing, thank you for that, Mr. Jameson, I guess I'm sort of asking a question and making a suggestion. The language seems a little circular because coming up with the lease and getting it approved is one of the necessary conditions. And so where in the first couple lines it says, hold off on authorizing the lease until you satisfy all the conditions, well, that would never happen because one of the conditions is getting the lease approved. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so my friendly suggestion is with in the bond resolution that we passed that had, a laundry list of a dozen or more conditions and sub-conditions to meet before the bonds could be issued, perhaps the sponsor would want to say before authorizing the lease that conditions X, Y, and Z be fulfilled first. And because I appreciate, I think the sentiment from the sponsor, and that, I think a lot of us are who have continuing issues we want to see resolved. There's a balance between, on the one hand, right, people want to get soccer going by a certain date, and so progress has to keep going forward. But it does feel a little bit like we're being slow cooked a little bit here by just, progress keeps going forward, and sooner or later we're going to hear, well, we've done 90% of the work, you might as well just approve the last little bit. So I appreciate the sentiment of wanting to take care of first things first, and to resolve the circularity. I could see it saying hold off on certain conditions in the bond resolution until certain other conditions are met, if that makes sense.
Councilman Glover?
I'm certainly open to whatever suggestion because, again, and Councilman Mendez, I'm happy to change the language, whatever you feel. I'm not a lawyer, let me say this, but I am trying to protect the taxpayers. And let me also say, the interpretation of us not having to surplus the property until a 100-year lease, I don't believe that's exactly what our own code says. I also understand that what the IRS code says, that once we exceed a 40-year lease, 50-year lease is what I believe the code says for Metro. that it's considered a transfer, even though we still maybe hold the property. It still is a transfer. So yes, I agree with you, Councilman. It does feel extremely circular because that's the way the whole deal has felt, just circular. They keep spinning around with new things every time, new things. And we're never given the information we ask for. This does continue to move forward. We know for a fact that if you put, and we can debate the numbers all you want to, but we know for a fact that if you build a stadium there that has 27,500 seats or 33,000 seats, as is being proposed now, 6,000 parking places does not work. And so therefore, before we step off the cliff, I am simply saying we need to slow this down, because I believe you're right, Councilman. This is exactly what they'll do. They'll say, oh, well, 90% of the work's done. We need to just go ahead and push it on through. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, the taxpayers get to pick up the tab, which we've already done on the Sound Stadium and a number of other deals that have been done here. So I'm hoping that while this is a non-binding resolution, we'll send a message of saying, let's slow down, let's make sure we don't put the taxpayers in harm's way. Again, not to say kill the deal, but let's just make sure we dot the I's and cross the T's. You know, I've never seen a deal go south if you actually are thorough in all the details. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Vice Chair Schulman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I was going along with what Councilman Mendez had said. Obviously, there were several of us at the meeting last week that Councilman Swope had of the Codes Committee, and I know that there were a number of questions that were asked that were not answered at that meeting. And I believe that there's another meeting coming up. I don't know if it's been set yet, but there was discussion about having another one of these meetings. I also know that this is not binding, but I think what I was trying to figure out was I know that there were some concerns expressed at that meeting about the Sports Authority proceeding ahead. Okay, so there was. I know at least the Sports Authority had indicated that they had some things in front of them, and there were some issues about are things ready? Have all the questions been addressed? This again may be a question for Mr. Jameson or for the administration. When Councilman Mendez was talking about the lease and all other necessary conditions precedent before we proceeded, I was trying to figure out, are these things listed here, like the final approval of the rezoning of the property, the 27-member votes required to authorize demolition? Have we got the car before the horse again? I'm trying to figure out, obviously, if we're ever going to do this, there has to be a process to get ready for that. If we have to wait to start approving demolition, does that mean nothing else can happen? And again, I know this is non-binding, but is this the right order? Or is the resolution supposed to be more about just saying, hey, wait a minute, slow down. There are questions that have to be addressed before anybody starts doing stuff. Let's make sure we get all our questions addressed first. I know that was a pretty long question, sorry.
But my understanding, and I think what may offer some comfort to council members, is that the administration's intention is not to slow bake the process and not to draw this out, but to file essentially all of the collective legislation together at the next meeting, August 7th. I believe including the resolution that would be then deferred to track with the legislation, and that would include the demolition requirement under the charter that requires 27 votes, the ticket tax to $1.75 that requires 27 votes, the underlying lease, the issuance of the GO bond, and the SP rezoning that has to go before planning, so that they're all taken collectively and we're not painted into a corner, as another council member has noted. In terms of whether or not there are other extraneous factors, sports authorities, authorizations, fair boards authorizations, I can't speak to that, but that is, I think, somewhat of a more comforting legislative approach than feared.
Madam Chair, so maybe I should ask my question this way, and this may be to the administration. Going back to what Councilman Glover was talking about, can somebody tell us, okay, so if the fair board is meeting tomorrow, what are they taking up, if anything? And then the Sports Authority, what are they taking up on this matter?
Sure, Councilman. The Fair Board tomorrow will be voting on the approval of the ground lease between the Fair Board and the Sports Authority for the stadium site. The Sports Authority will be approving that ground lease as well as a lease agreement with the team for the operation of the stadium, a development agreement for the construction of the stadium, and a construction administration agreement. We're following the typical process that you would for any project, and that you go to the boards and commissions first before the council votes. Typically, the council wants to know whether the boards and commissions affected are in support. So that will happen, and then nothing gets done without council approval of that legislation. No agreements get signed. That's just the Sports Authority giving their, and the Fair Board would be giving their preliminary approval, obviously contingent upon the council approving the required legislation.
Okay, so I guess my last question to that would be, obviously, there were questions that were asked at that meeting last week that still remain to be answered, whether it was parking or scheduling and other things like that. Understanding that, is there, if the Fair Board were to take up the lease, Sports Authority, are they in a position to proceed ahead, or is it better to wait until some of those questions get answered? And I think I'm trying to understand what Councilman Glover is doing, but I know that there were questions that were supposed to be picked up at the next meeting. And so I think my question is there any benefit, is there a benefit to slowing it down tomorrow or at the Sports Authority, or are these things other things that can be handled at some other time?
I think if the council was not satisfied with the answers to the questions at the time the legislation comes forward, then that would be the opportunity to address that. I don't see any reason the Sports Authority or the Fair Board would need to hold up pending those council questions.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councilman Glover.
So let me ask this question as directly as I can. I'd like a real honest answer. When are we going to see the study that MLS did that said the fairgrounds was the right place to put this? When will that study finally appear?
Councilman, I don't know that there was such a study. I was not involved in the project until after the site was identified, so I can't answer that.
Okay, is this the first time I've asked this question?
I don't recall specifically, I'm sorry.
Okay, well, I do recall specifically. I've gone back and looked at it numerous times. I've asked repeatedly to see the study. And the reason I'm pushing the issue is because I know as well as you know, there wasn't a study. They were basically told this is where they're going to go. And so therefore, there's so many components of this that don't feel right. There are so many details that haven't been dealt with. We haven't surplused the land. We haven't followed our own processes. We basically are putting ourselves in jeopardy because I don't understand the other piece yet on the state fair component. What does this do if we put this stadium there? What does it do to the state fair component? You know, everybody's saying that I'm against soccer. I'm not against soccer. I am against the taxpayers getting socked to them. That part I am against. But I've asked repeatedly, and we can go back. I'll be glad to pull the video portions of it, of where I've asked repeatedly to see the studies. Nobody's ever said there wasn't one. In fact, the answer was, we'll get it for you. Well, there was nothing to get because it doesn't exist. So what I'm simply saying to the council is we need to open our eyes up completely and understand we could be putting ourselves in jeopardy on more than just this one component of a soccer stadium. So I don't think it hurts us to slow down to make sure we're doing our job properly and we are being good stewards of the taxpayers' money, A, and then B, that we're protecting the taxpayers. And then the final little component is that we actually honor what the voters voted on in 2011 with the referendum that says the fairgrounds will do the fair, will do these things, you know, et cetera, as opposed to the translation that seems to be occurring right now on that. So again, it's non-binding. I'm more than happy to change some language up in it, whatever. You know, I would even defer it if I wasn't afraid we're going to go ahead and just keep railroading this right down the road, starting as early as tomorrow that we've just heard. So with that in mind, I mean, vote it however you want to, but we need to be aware that we're entering into territory here. Again, this piece of property had a referendum specifically done on it that we don't have to deal with in other places. So that's why I'm bringing it forward to say it probably wouldn't hurt for us to actually make sure we're doing everything correctly and legally on this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Glover. Councilman Swope, I'm going to come to you. If you can provide some insight for the upcoming meeting.
I'd be glad to, Madam Chair. Thank you. And thank you for letting me address the committee here. As Councilman Schulman alluded to, last Tuesday we had a very large meeting basically asking all the stakeholders of the fairgrounds property and the MLS people and parks and the water department and a few other departments to come and sit down and have an honest conversation about everybody's likes and dislikes from a facility operations standpoint. And as you said, Councilman Schulman, I think we all walked out of that room thinking, okay, we have a lot of parking questions, we have a lot of infrastructure questions, we have a lot of scheduling, operational scheduling questions that no one in the room seemed to have an answer to at the time. I think what Councilman Glover is attempting to do right now is to basically put the brakes on this for just a second until we can sit down collectively and have some adult conversations about how to deal with those specific issues. I alluded to a second meeting on this, and the second meeting, Madam Chair, would, with your agreement, would be a joint meeting of the Codes and Budget and Finance Committee, where we would discuss the financial elements involved in the MLS stadium being on the fairgrounds property, because I purposely did not want to mix those two meetings. There's an operational element to this, operational logistics and scheduling, and there's a whole financial element to it. The financial element, I absolutely believe that the Budget and Finance Committee needs to be part and parcel of that conversation moving forward. So with that said, I hope that clarifies to this committee what happened last Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilman. Vice Chair Schulman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was actually going to request that information from Councilman Swope, and you went ahead and did it. It seems to me that at some point, not only the financial aspects of it, but everything that was addressed at the last one that wasn't answered needs to be put on the table. And the faster we can have that meeting, the better it is for everybody. But what I'm not sure of is this resolution is, I'm not sure if it's worded correctly. I understand, I think what you're trying to do, and there's lots of information that needs to be provided. Just not sure if the resolution says what, I think it may get into that circular motion that Councilman Mendez was talking about. So the question is, and the Fair Board is meeting tomorrow, I believe. Okay, so this thing won't even be moved until then. I'm not sure when the Sports Authority meets. Of this coming Thursday, okay.
Councilman Glover.
Mr. Jameson, based on the recommendations that Councilman Mendez has made, given that this is a late filed resolution, and that I'm going to have to ask to suspend the rules anyway, can that language be, and Councilman Mendez, I don't want to speak on your behalf, but would you take a look? And I mean, I'm happy to write it in the legalese way that it needs to be, et cetera. Again, it's non-binding, but it is kind of bringing attention to guys, we might be stepping into places we don't need to be stepping into right now until we fully understand what it is that we're doing. So with that, Mr. Jameson, if Councilman Mendez, if he wanted to change some of the language in it, would he be allowed to? And it's not going to change anything because, again, it's going to be late filed tomorrow anyway.
Sure. Both motions would be preceded by a motion to suspend the introduction of the underlying resolution and the introduction of an amendment thereto. But
Okay. So with that, then Councilman Mendez, Councilman Schulman, I mean, either of you guys, you're both attorneys. If you see some language that needs to be cleared up, then I would more than welcome any input that you have on it. Frankly, this was not something I had on my agenda until after the meeting that Councilman Swope posted the other night. And frankly, thank you, because I think it highlighted the fact that there are a lot of questions and a lot of areas that have not been answered yet. So with that, I'll renew the motion to approve from the committee with the understanding that if Councilman Mendez and Schulman want to help with the language, I'm more than open to taking that.
And I believe Councilman Mendez is not in agreement with, so be prepared for an amendment to tomorrow, Councilman Glover.
Thank you.
We're going to acknowledge two council members that's not on the committee. Councilman Davis, briefly, we need to move.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. So, Mr. Cooper, just so I'm clear here, all right? When we enter a 99-year lease with a piece of property, the council can approve an ordinance, and we don't have to go through surplus property. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you, Councilman Davis. Councilman Sledge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, this impacts my district. I just asked the committee to try and consider this. This legislation is coming before the body probably within the next 30 days. It's coming before the Planning Commission. It's scheduled to come before the Planning Commission on the 1st. I think there's certainly some things that are going to come out of the meetings that we've been having, and I would encourage not only for there to be a finance-related meeting of this, but that it be a joint committee meeting between codes and budgets so that as many people as possible.
Yeah, Councilman, we discussed that prior to your arrival.
So, Chair, the only thing I would say is I, as the council member who represents the piece of land that's in this district, oppose this resolution. I'd ask the committee to let the Metro government continue to do their work and let us continue to do ours as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilman Sledge, and thank you for being here. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Opposed?
Show of hands.
Show of hands. On the ayes. I'm an aye.
4.
Opposed?
2. 4 to 2.
4 to 2, resolution passes. Now we're on bills on second reading. BL 2018-1246, sponsored Vercher and Withers, adopts the 5-year consolidated plan and the 2018 action plan for housing and community development and authorizes the mayor to submit to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilman Mendez.
Thanks. I've got an amendment that I'd like to move and then have a brief explanation.
It's been moved and seconded.
So at the last meeting, when we talked about this one, and this is MDHA's 5-year consolidated plan, I noted that transit-oriented development districts references were throughout the document, and it was listed as a strategy. And I asked the question, I'm not sure the community is, as a whole has signed off on transit-oriented development to be throughout the city. And I wasn't sure it should be included as a strategy to address housing in this plan. After the meeting, Ms. Hubbard from MDHA suggested that we do an amendment like this, and so this is the language we've worked out, and I'd ask that we add this. It basically acknowledges that for now, transit-oriented development is not a strategy. We don't have transit passed, and if that changes, we can amend the plan again. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Mendez. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Amendment passes. Now we're on the bill as amended. All in favor? Opposed? Bill passes as amended. BL 2018-1257, sponsors Kendall, Vercher, and others, approves a lease agreement between Metro and Christine Pinal Living Trust for the building located at 33-7 and 33-9 21st Avenue North. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Bill is recommended. BL 2018-1258, sponsors Roberts, Vercher, and others, authorizes the acquisition of right-of-way easements, drainage easements, temporary construction easements, and property rights for the purpose of James Avenue sidewalk improvements. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Bill is recommended. BL 2018-1259, sponsors Allen, Vercher, and others, authorizes the acquisition of right-of-way easements, drainage easements, temporary construction easements, and property rights for purposes of 25th Avenue South sidewalk improvements. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Bill is recommended. BL 2018-1260, sponsors Davis, Anthony Davis, Vercher, and others, authorizes the acquisition of certain right-of-way easements, drainage easements, temporary construction easements, and property rights for purposes of Stratford Avenue sidewalk improvements. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Bill is recommended. BL 2018-1269, sponsors Elrod, Vercher, and Betnay, authorizes the acquisition of right-of-way easements, drainage easements, temporary construction easements, and property rights for purposes of Walford Drive sidewalk improvements. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Bill is recommended. BL 2018-1262, sponsors Vercher, Betnay, and Elrod, authorizes the acquisition of right-of-way easements, drainage easements, temporary construction easements, and property rights for purposes of Hobson Pike sidewalk improvements. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Bill is recommended. And we are adjourned.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.